Welcome to the place where we learn about and learn from the leaders in our field who are powering human creativity. I am Aaron Dworkin, and this is Arts Engines. Thanks again for joining me here on Arts Engines. Today's guest is Jenny Bilfield, who serves as President and CEO of Washington Performing Arts. Jenny, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Aaron, for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
Well, I am so excited because not only can I, ask you questions about these amazing work that you do, your role as a leader and everything that Washington Performing Arts does that is so extraordinary, but I've had the benefit of seeing your work front and center for so many years. I've had the honor to be able to partner with you and Sphinx partnering. So just that I'm excited for our audience because I really do feel like you are one of the leaders in our field, in the country, especially when it comes to creation, collaboration of work, bringing new works to stages, and really leading the field in that way, which you've done in a host of positions prior to Washington Performing Arts. So I just wanted to start by saying thank you.
Well, thank you. I mean, you have been someone who's inspired me with your vision and your generosity as a creative artist and as a leader. So I always love following what you do. It's mutual admiration.
Awesome. So, well, why don't we actually, on that theme of kind of creating commissioning works and all of that, and I'd be curious, as you kind of answer this question, what your sense is of kind of the industry, given, hopefully we are coming out of the pandemic, but how that might have affected commissioning, but also if you could share the start for your season, which begins with a commission.
Absolutely. So I guess I'll start a little bit further back, which will give you a sense of why I veer so much towards working with artists who are creating the next sort of body of work that future generations will enjoy. So, I started out playing the piano when I was 3. I played, in a home where my mother loved music, but didn't really play well, but she, I'd sit down and replicate whatever she was playing. I do it by ear. And I started playing classical works and jazz, and we had the record player on. So I heard a lot of music that I then tried to figure out on the keyboard and inside the piano. So I was very attracted to sound and kind of the creative possibilities of that instrument. And then I started composing when I was 10 or 11 and continued on up until college, but really found that the gravitational pull was towards creating opportunities for other people to discover music of any kind, Renaissance song, contemporary works, percussion. But I loved being that matchmaker between artists and audiences. And it was especially exciting to me as a trained composer to take these many different types of experiences that an organization has and mobilizes and which an audience has and bring those together in the discovery of new work. I love collaborating. Maybe it's because I was the very, very, very youngest of my siblings. There's 18 years between us. So I was sort of an only child and always wanted to make friends and do things with friends. And so I think, it sort of grew from there to what is really the bedrock of my work as a collaborator. You mentioned the beginning of our season. So we, about 5 years ago, met with Virginia Johnson and Anna Glass, who were the artistic director and executive director of Dance Theater of Harlem. And Washington Performing Arts first presented DTH in the 1970s. We were their first presenter in Washington, D.C. under Doug Wheeler. And as they were coming back, I was starting, and there was a chance to sort of refresh our relationship. And as time went on, the thing that was most exciting to both of us was the idea of focusing on a special project together so that it wasn't simply a rep performance, not that that wouldn't be, thrilling and exciting because they're wonderful dancers and they're constantly creating new work, but because it was an opportunity to sort of be in a state of discovery and presentation in a whole new way. So when I went to talk with Anna and Virginia, we were in the midst of planning the Hazel Scott Centenary. Now, Hazel Scott is remembered as an extraordinary pianist. She was one of the first artists at Cafe Society, which was an fully integrated nightclub in New York City. She had her own TV show, radio show. She was glamorous and gorgeous and a brilliant artist. She also studied at Juilliard. She was a child prodigy. And yet, because she was a Black woman in the early half of the 20th century, she was pushed towards jazz and away from classical music. So Hazel Scott fused classical, jazz, was a remarkable performer and truly a virtuoso in everything that she touched. We wanted to honor her legacy because Hazel Scott was someone who absolutely broke glass ceilings and inspired many other artists and frankly paved ways for other artists. But because she came up against she went to the House Committee on Un-American Activities, her career abruptly ended. She went to Paris. She worked for many years there. She came back to the United States. But we always wondered what would have happened if she had not been swept up during that time. And so this seemed like a perfect opportunity, the centenary of her birth, to honor her and her legacy. It's very tricky to plan a season around a performer who is no longer with us. Easier to do that around a composer because there's a lot of work. Many people can perform it. She arranged music. She did write some music. And actually, Laura Downs was able to get hold of transcriptions and make transcriptions. And people have been fascinated with Hazel's work. I never knew her, but I'm referring to her in the first person because that's how I feel and how we feel. But as we began to imagine how we might bring her legacy to life, we began working with her biographer, Karen Chilton, and Murray Horwitz, who is one of our artists in residence. And Murray was a very close friend of Hazel's and very close to her son, Adam Clayton Powell III, who lives in the DC region. The opportunity to tease out these narratives in Hazel's life as a woman, as a musician, as a leader, began to transpose to other sort of modes of storytelling. And knowing that Hazel Scott essentially grew up in Harlem, she married Adam Clayton Powell Jr., who was the distinguished congressman from Harlem and also at Abyssinian Baptist Church. And they had a life in Washington. I mean, this axis began to form between the geography, the politics, the music industry, and frankly, our lives. I mean, the life of Washington Performing Arts and Dance Theater of Harlem, that's where that kind of alchemy comes in. And I think that Virginia was really intrigued, but was trying to figure out how to do something that wasn't just a biopic. And over the course of a year or two, identified a great choreographer, Tiffany Ray Fisher, who I had known for some time, but who had not set a ballet for Dance Theater of Harlem, so engaged her. And then Erica Blunt, who's the composer, who's created this sort of montage of music by Hazel and her own music. So, putting together a consortium to commission the work, grant funding, local support, when we had to explain quite frequently who Hazel Scott was, created this sort of step-by-step climb. And I loved that we were able to get the word out soon because all of this momentum has built around the Hazel Scott Ballet. And there are a number of performances around the country in October, well into the year, residencies with Dance Theater of Harlem. I love that they felt this sense of momentum, bringing their own identity. And we have a Cafe Society event and an event with the Library of Congress planned. Great art can inspire collaboration and connection in a way that is so kinetic. And this is a perfect example of that.
It's extraordinary. And I love how you illustrated just what is, we all know the buzzwords of collaboration or those types of things, but the way you just illustrated how you actually go about it in such an intentional, thoughtful, and authentic way with partners is really just fantastic. And I think it's going to be an extraordinary, obviously, program and launch to your season. So just kind of shifting gears a little bit, also kind of talking about this, kind of world that we're in now post-pandemic. And some, presenters either are looking at, have or have not historically, looked at bringing in orchestras and all of that. And just wondering kind of what's your sense of that now?
Gosh. Well, I have to say, going into the pandemic, having to, cut half the season and then the following year going all digital, which was incredibly satisfying, including the collaboration with Sphinx, because we managed, actually, the Sphinx Ensemble did their filming at the Dance Theater of Harlem studio for our Home Delivery Plus. So, even more connections abound. It was very frustrating, I think, for all of us during the pandemic to feel so distant from orchestras. It was just impossible to bring orchestras to our, to our shores. Orchestras did their own digital streaming, and we really felt the absence, just the scale and the history. Washington Performing Arts is one of the longest presenting organizations in the country for orchestras, and not that many presenters still present orchestras. They might present one. We've always presented a series, as many as 9, when we did the Shift Festival with the Kennedy Center. So when we announced that we would be returning this year with orchestras that were from all over the world, from Taiwan, from Finland, from the UK, from Canada, and of course, from Detroit, because we're bringing the Sphinx Orchestra with Exigence and choral arts, with Washington Chorus, and Eugene Rogers and Tito Munoz, and a piece that our audience has actually heard, Joel Thompson's 7 Last Words of the Unarmed, which we performed with our gospel choirs. It is an absolutely amazing program. And what I love about each of these programs is that each orchestra is presenting something that they're not presenting all over the place. So it's a program that has a bit of a tweak for the audiences in Washington, D.C. Because we have such a heavy international presence in Washington, we work with embassies through our embassy adoption program in the schools, which has been going on for 50 years, and in many other ways. So the title of the season is The World in Our City. And with our orchestra season, we're bringing the world to our city. Each orchestra is doing a work by a living composer from their country. So it's Kaija Saariaho from Finland, it's Thomas Addis from the UK, and so on. And that for me feels very special to our earlier conversation about commissioning. Each of these orchestras commissions work regularly. They have dynamic new conductors. They're bringing really exciting soloists. The soloists are performing contemporary music. Very often when orchestras travel, they completely avoid modern music because they're asked to just bring the war horses. We're bringing orchestras that are balancing the great symphonic works through which audiences can discover their sound and their playing, and also works that they've championed as commissioners themselves.
It's such important work. And I especially love that last part that you said about, and this gives an opportunity for your audiences to hear more. That audiences, of course, want war horses or think we do,
yeah.
But then to have the opportunity to hear this extraordinary new music, and especially really get into the identity of that particular orchestra and what they have to bring, their kind of DNA that they're bringing to your city, right? It's just, I think that's really, really exciting. So one additional thing I just wanted to make sure we captured, I think this is a kind of anniversary for Washington Performing Arts for your gospel choirs. Could you just share a little bit about that?
Yes, indeed. So over the next 2 seasons, we'll celebrate the 30th anniversaries of our Men and Women of the Gospel Choir and our Children of the Gospel Choir. We are the only arts presenter in the country that has 2 resident gospel choirs, and they were started back in the 1990s by Doug Wheeler, President Emeritus, and Eric Terrain, who was the first director, and over the years have hosted so many different illustrious artists, and most importantly, have built a community of gospel singers who perform at the Kennedy Center. In fact, our gospel choirs were the first to perform at the Kennedy Center, shockingly, all over the city in many different events and ceremonies. So Children of the Gospel have performed at the White House numerous times. They've performed at the National Cathedral for Nelson Mandela's memorial service, on the Today Show, for all sorts of very special local events and some very important national events. What's super exciting about the evolution of the program is that the adult choir, which is directed by Theodore Thorpe III, and the Children of the Gospel choir, directed by Michelle Fallon, really received this very intensive musical training. The children's choir all the more so. We worked on a strategic plan to build the staffing for the choir, both on the administrative side and the artistic side. And we began to work on programs, especially with the children, that fused what they were thinking and experiencing in the world in a way that would tell that story to the audience. So they contributed content. They jointly wrote the content with the directors and with the writers. We have a choreographer in residence who works with them on choirography. So the productions that they're developing are very much of them, with them, and for them as young people. And during the pandemic, there were many opportunities to hear their voices even more strongly. They rehearsed remotely, as did the adults, but they really had, they had very strong and eloquent ways of seeing themselves, expressing how they saw themselves during a time of enormous trauma and unrest. And in addition to embedding these incredibly strong musical skills that make them really fine singers and fine interpreters of music, the choir program has really emphasized that young people have agency, and that we're really proud that they use their voices in many different ways, instead of just sort of the neat kind of pristine choir. That they perform really well, and they step up to the microphone in a variety of ways. And for me, that feels like a very modern and appropriate way for this choir to develop and frankly to be celebrated. So we have performances coming, recording, beginning to think about touring down the line. There are some super special featured appearances that we have planned. So it's exciting. We're going to use it as a way of launching into the next 10 years.
Awesome. Absolutely awesome. Well, it is extraordinary work that you are doing, have been doing, and your leadership just really stands as an example for all of us across the country and across the world. So unfortunately, we are just about out of time, but I always like to ask of all my guests, all of this extraordinary work that you are doing, especially some of it that is so cutting edge and innovative and impactful for your audiences. There's got to be tough days when you feel like, you're not going to be able to get things to work, et cetera. And so curious for your leadership style. We have so many leaders who tune into the show. Where do you turn for that sense of strength or inspiration when times are toughest for you?
I turn inward to try to have a clear and strong voice that connects with my gut, first of all, because there's a lot of stuff that comes at us, and sometimes it's hard to center ourselves and really trust the gut. I also have a group of colleagues who've known me for, 30 to 40 years, who know who I am at my essence without all the other sort of apparatus. And I will often go to them with some really tough questions, and there's a level of trust and respect there that is reciprocated between us when I need to get my grounding. My husband, who, I've been with him for over 30 years, is my rock, and he has been one of my best and closest supporters, advisors, partners. I couldn't do what I do without having the most amazing supportive spouse. But I have to say that when those tough days are on us, and we've had a lot of tough days the past couple of years, there are a couple of things that I think of. One is, like, have one narrative, like know who you are, what you stand for, how you want to exist in the world, and how you treat people. It shouldn't change from day to day. It shouldn't change person to person, like one narrative, not multiple narratives. The second thing is define community as broadly as possible. When I talk about our community, it includes artists and teachers and patrons. It's not the community like it's something we go to and then go away from. It's our community, and people are in there if they connect with Washington Performing Arts. That's our community. And the third thing is build trust in your community. You do that by having a narrative that has integrity and consistency, and where community is generously welcomed. So when I put those things together, I think about that sort of North Star where they intersect in a Venn diagram, and that gets me to the place I need in order to make the next right decision, I hope.
Jenny Bilfield, you truly are one of the arts engines who is powering human creativity in our world. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Aaron.